Alright, hey guys, we're going to be continuing on with Chapter 9. We're going to be looking at Objective 2 in this video, which is about the subcategories and examples of joints. And so far in Objective 1 we covered the two general ways that joints can be classified, and that was structural and that was functional. And so your structural could be either fibrous, cartilaginous, or synovial. And then your functional could be synarthroses, amphiarthroses, and diarthroses. And so now we're just going to kind of move forward and talk about these in a little bit more detail. And we're going to take a look at some specific joints within each type. Now, the first thing I want to point out is we're kind of joining up the structural and the functional together, okay? Now, I do want to be clear and say that there could be exceptions to the rule, okay? But in general, if you have a fibrous joint, which is going to be held tightly by fibrous connective tissue, then it's probably not going to be moving a whole lot, okay? So your fibrous joints are typically going to be synarthroses in terms of function, and that they aren't going to move very much at all, okay? Now, one common example of this are the sutures. If you're in lab, you have to identify the sutures in the skull, like the coronal suture or the sagittal suture. And so these are going to be strongly united and connected, okay? We really don't want those bones in our skulls sliding around. And so these are going to be a fibrous joint that is not really movable. Another example is syndesmoses. And these are where you have, like in your lower limbs, like in your forearm and in the lower part of your leg where you have those two bones. So like you have the radius and the ulna. Now these bones are going to be connected. It almost kind of looks like saran wrap, but these bones are going to be connected by some fibrous tissue to keep them from kind of moving in directions they aren't supposed to. Okay, so in between the tibia and the fibula in the leg, and in between the radius and ulna in the arm, you're going to have these syndesmoses types of joints. And then a third type of fibrous non-movable is going to be gomphoses, which is going to be pretty much your teeth. They are anchored into a socket, and aside from your baby teeth, which get loosened and we pull those out, once you have those grown-up teeth, we really don't want them moving around in there. So this is another type of fibrous non-movable joint. All right, now our next grouping is going to be our cartilaginous, which these are the ones that have cartilage, and essentially they can move a little bit, but not a whole lot. Okay, so they're slightly movable, so they do have a flexible type of cartilage. And then these two examples pretty much depend on what type of cartilage holds them together. If it's a synchondrosis, we have the hyaline cartilage, and you'll find that like up here, like around your rib cage, okay? The hyaline cartilage is also what we find in that epiphyseal plate. So if you've gone through Chapter 6, we know that what we kind of call our growth plate, that is hyaline cartilage. It will eventually become an epiphyseal line when your growth is complete, but when it's that hyaline cartilage, this is where you have the diaphysis and the epiphyses meeting in your bones. And then a symphysis, once again, if you're in lab, that would be helpful because this is one of the types of cartilage you had to identify was fibrocartilage. And you'll find that like in the pubic symphysis that connect those two coxal bones. You'll also find it in those vertebral discs. Okay, so both of these are made of cartilage, one hyaline, one fibrocartilage, and both of them are slightly movable. And then we have our third grouping, which is going to be your synovial. Remember, these are the ones that are in a synovial cavity with synovial fluid, and these are the ones that are freely movable, so they kind of go together, okay? So we have a capsule lined with that synovial membrane. Those bones are covered in articular cartilage to kind of help keep them from rubbing together, and these guys are going to be moving quite a bit, okay? And so when it comes to your synovial joints, we have 6 different types. This is actually another possible essay. So this slide right here, the essay says, name the 6 types of synovial joints and an example of each. And so I really like to study these with the pictures, which is why I left this up here. So a pivot joint is one where you have like let's see, where do we have it? We have like a raised structure, and you're able to move around. So this would kind of be like your ability to kind of nod your head side to side, or move, like to say no with your head and to look side to side. You have your atlas and your axis, which are your C1 and your C2 vertebra. That axis has this little notch that the atlas can kind of rotate around, and so that is what we call a pivot joint. A hinge joint, think about like a door hinge, okay? You'll find a hinge joint in your elbow. So you kind of have like the hinge and then the little kind of concave structure that goes around that hinge. Pretty much one type of movement, one plane of movement. So you'll find a hinge joint in your elbow, but you will also find a hinge joint in your knee. And if you think about it, your elbow and your knee, you can pretty much make one type of movement there. You can't go all different directions. Then you have a condyloid joint, okay, also known as an ellipsoid. And this is where a condyle is a rounded structure on your joints. You may have come across those in lab, but a rounded structure in a depression. Okay, it's kind of going to be not a whole lot of movement, but you can see it between the radius and the carpal bones there. So just kind of a little bit of movement there. You have a saddle joint, which if you think about like a saddle on a horse, you know, you have kind of two surfaces that cave in, and one kind of sits on top of the other. And if you think about like a saddle on top of a horse, think about how they could kind of slide over each other. And so your saddle joint is going to be between your carpals and your metacarpals there, like in your kind of thumb area. We have a plane joint, and these are going to be when you have two flat bones kind of sliding against each other. We'll take a look at the gliding movement here in a moment. And so you kind of have flat on flat, and you will find plane joints in those your carpals and your tarsals. So it kind of allows you to kind of wave your hand, but you just kind of have flat bones sliding on each other. And then you have your ball and socket, which most people are probably pretty familiar with this one, but this is the one that's going to give you the greatest range of motion. And you're going to have a ball and socket joint up here with your humerus and the girdle up here, the pectoral girdle. And then you're going to find another ball and socket down here with your hip. The femur is going to go into that pelvic girdle there. And if you think about the movement you can get there, you can move your arm in all kinds of directions, make big circles, throw a ball, same thing with that leg. You can move them in many different directions. And so here's just kind of another summary there. I think the pictures are really great. I would definitely encourage you to watch. There's some good videos about joints, like crash courses, and they can kind of show them to you in action, and I think that's kind of helpful as well. Now this chart right here is a great overall chart for Chapter 9. So if you're going to study anything for Chapter 9, this might be a good one. And so remember, one of your essays was the two general classifications and their examples. And so these bold words here, cartilaginous, fibrous, and synovial, these were your structural classifications. Okay, so you would say for that particular essay, you had a structural classification based on what they're made up of or how they're built. And these are my three examples here. And then the ones that are in italics, those are going to be my functional classification. And you see we're kind of grouping them together, and that those structural kind of go along with the ability to move there. So this right here is pretty much kind of one of your possible essays. So we have the structural, those words in bold, and then we have the functional, the words that are in italics. And then it kind of breaks it down even further, and that you have the subtypes, okay, of each one, and an example of where you can find those in the body. And then this right here is another possible essay, and that you have your 6 synovial joints and an example of those. And if you were to get this essay, you don't necessarily have to use the exact joint names. You could just say in the carpals or the tarsals, something like that would be okay. All right, so a few questions before we move on to the next video. So which of the following is an example of a fibrous or synarthrosis joint? All right, well, hinge and plane are both going to be synovial joints. Okay, so it's not those. Synchondrosis was one of our cartilaginous, and so that is going to leave us with gomphoses, which are going to be your teeth sockets. The metacarpophalangeal joint is an example of what type of joint? This right here is just one of those ones you may just kind of have to go back and look in your chart, but this is going to be an ellipsoid, also known as a condyloid. All right, and that is going to take us to objective 3, and I will see you in the next video.